The recent technology radar from ThoughtWorks mentions the Lambda pinball. What is the Lambda pinball? Basically, they are saying that with regards to the serverless architecture, example lambdas, they recommend as of April 26, 2023, to keep it on hold. So in the technology radar, they say which technologies they think you should adopt, which you should hold, and which you should wait with. They specify 100 technologies. They have 11,000 professionals over the world where they make this survey. They release it, I think, twice a year. So in the recent one, they said that with regards to serverless architectures, hold. What does hold means? Hold means proceed with caution. So let's read what they say. While serverless architectures can be extremely useful for solving some problems, they can come with a certain level of complexity, especially when they involve non-trivial execution and data flows across multiple interdependent lambdas. This can sometimes result in the lambda pinball architecture. Lambda pinball architecture is some tweet that was made in Twitter where they specified what is the Lambda pinball architecture. Serverless paradox, abstracting away the runtime, is supposed to relieve you from infrastructural concerns and let you focus on the business logic. But instead, the pinball machine of lambdas. Buckets and queues yields an dynamic domain. So basically they say, okay, so now it's not really a standard project that you start, that you have unit test on. I mean, you can, but that defeats the whole purpose. The whole purpose of lambdas is some code you host somewhere and you don't care about the server. And it's not a server that you can start locally and test it locally, not easily, not trivially. So this is the Lambda pinball. I mean, it's like a pinball and you don't just some serverless functions run and it makes it complex. Important business rules are concealed in the interaction between components. Unit tests as a way to explore domain concepts become infeasible, and the system only makes sense and can be tested as an integrated whole. Only in the basic way, you can test the system only when you actually have everything set up and running. Has anyone else been in this paradox play out, or am I just wrong? So this was the tweet. So it can sometimes result in the Lambda pinball architecture. Our teams have reported that maintaining and testing Lambda pinball architectures can be very challenging. Understanding the infrastructure, deployment, diagnosis, and debugging can become difficult. At code level, simple mapping between domain concepts and the multiple lambdas involved is particularly impossible, making any changes and additions challenging. Although we believe serverless is the right fit for some problems and domains, it's not a silver bullet for every problem, which is why you should try to avoid Lambda pinball. One pattern that can help is to draw a distinction between public and published interfaces and apply, let's see this soon. What does it mean, the distinction between public and published interfaces? And apply domain boundaries with published interfaces between them. This is going to be interesting. Not necessarily specifically to the lambdas. In general, this concept of public and published, let's look at it soon. Also in November 2019, they also said hold. It was still, so it's on hold from 2019, basically when a couple of years since it came out. Until today, it's still on hold. According to ThoughtWorks Technology Radar, we've been building serverless architectures. That's what they said previously. On 2019, we've been building serverless architectures on our projects for a couple of years now, and we've noticed that it's quite easy to fall into the trap of building distributed monolith. Lambda pinball architectures characteristically lose sight of important domain logic in the tangled web of lambdas. Buckets and queues as requests bounce around increasingly complex graphs of cloud services. Typically, they're hard to test as units, and the application needs must be tested as an integrated whole. One pattern we can use to avoid this pinball architecture is to draw a distinction between public and published interfaces and apply good old domain boundaries with published interfaces between them. Let's see how these published interfaces would help us. So this is another paper, like a design paper by ThoughtWorks. Public versus published interfaces. So one of the growing trends in software design is separating interfaces from implementation. Yeah, this is basic. Separate the interface from the implementation. The principle is about separating modules into public and private parts, so that you can change the private part without coordinating with other modules. However, there is further distinction, the one between public and published interfaces. This distinction is important because it affects how you work with the interfaces. Public versus published. Let's assume I'm writing an application in a modern modular language. To make things more concrete, let's assume this language is Java. My application does consist of several classes and interfaces, each of which has a public interface. This public interface of class defines a group of methods that any other class in the system can invoke. Yeah, so public, others can use it, but what is published? While I'm enhancing a public method, I realize that one of its parameters is redundant. I don't need to use it in the method. Maybe I can get that value through some other route. Maybe I don't need it anymore. So it says in the public interface, I need to change some parameter, maybe even to remove it. At this point, I can eliminate that value from the method signature, clarifying the method and potential saving works for the caller. Because this method is public, any class in the system can call it. Should I remove the parameter? In this case, I would argue yes. Interesting. Because there are benefits and it isn't difficult. Yes, so it already sounds like public is public internally. Okay, you can manage who calls it. So this is why he's going to, I think, going to be able to remove this parameter. While published to the world, you don't know who uses it. And this is where he wouldn't be able to delete this parameter. But let's validate this. Though the method might be used anywhere, I can easily find the users with a search tool. Yeah, because it's public, but in our code bases, we have control over it. If I have one of the new breeds of refactoring tools available for Java, I can do it with a simple menu click. The power of Java. This is why I love Java. We can do things with a click, change some parameter name in a code base. In other languages, it's not that simple. I can do it with a simple menu click. The tool will then automatically update all the callers, so changing a public method isn't a big deal. However, things rapidly change if I put that software out on the web as a component and other people whom I don't know start building applications on top of it. If I now delete the parameter, everybody else's code will break when I upgrade. Now I must do something a little more elaborate. I can produce the new method with one less parameter, but keep the old method, probably recording the old method to call the new one. So it says, did he mention already published here? Not yet. So it's if the software is out on the web. So if the software is out on the web, he cannot really delete it. He can, but he will break lines. So he said I can introduce a new method without a step parameter that would call the old method. Probably recoding the old method to call the new one. I mark the old method as deprecated. assuming people will move the code over and that I can change in the next release or two. The two cases are quite different, yet there is nothing in Java language to tell the difference, a gap that's also present in a few other languages, not just in languages as concept. Yet there's something to be said for the public published distinction, and this is exactly what we thought. We thought that public published is something that you have no control over the clients, you published it externally. Even internally in a company, but you don't know who the clients are, you published it. You can't control them. Distinction being more important than the more common public-private distinction. The key difference is being able to find and change the code that uses an interface. For a published interface, this isn't possible. So you need a more elaborate interface update process. Interface users are either callers or are classes that subclass or implement the interface. Yeah. So do they talk here about Lambda? So yeah, so I think we don't need to continue reading this. We understand what's the difference. Recognizing the difference is important. Don't treat interfaces as published here. If you need to change the interface and you can find all the users, change it. Don't publish interfaces inside the team. I suggest somebody that would change a public method and he objected because of the problem caused by it by being published. The real problem was that although there were only 3 people on the team, each developer treated his interface as published to the other 2. This is because the team used a strong form of code ownership, which each module was assigned to a single programmer, and only that programmer could change the module code. I'm sympathetic to code ownership, encourages people to monitor their code quality, but a strong code ownership model such as this one causes problems by forcing you to treat interperson interfaces as published. I encourage a weaker ownership model in which one person is responsible for the module, but other can make changes. I agree with this. You can say only he make changes to his model, but you can say also other people can make changes. This let other developers do things such as alter calls and change method, and they can do code review. This kind of ownership usually requires a configuration management system that supports concurrent writers. There is a limit to how big a team you can run without some form of internal publishing, but I would err on the side of too little publishing. In other words, assume you don't need to publish interfaces. Then adjust if you find this causes problem. So far makes sense. So what did I mean by public published would help lambdas? The form method, instead of changing the method, try adding a new method without parameter additions. Can still what? Yeah. I would like to see the public published distinction appear more in languages and platform. Yeah. So the published, yeah. So probably what they mean, I mean, it's not explicitly said, but by the fact that public and published interface would help you with Lambda to avoid some pinball is that if I have a Lambda function that does too many things, then it would only make the problem harder and more complex. While if I have good separation and I say, okay, these lambdas are internal, this lambda isn't external, but it handles only image upload. This is its interface. Okay, so I can replace it in a mock unit test. When I call the upload image, I know exactly what this lambda does versus a lambda that would have a switch case. So I think what it means is you have something that you can't fully control, you can't fully unit test, you can't fully start up. So give it some specific meaning, some specific published API, public API, depending if it's external or not, but make it so specific, right? And decide if it's public or published with good old domain boundaries, with published interfaces between them, meaning, yeah, it's going to be, you need to be here more strict. So make this published, make this Boundaries, have good boundaries, good API, do a specific thing, and in this case, you can mitigate somehow the problem of the mess that you're going to have with serverless. I think this is the meaning. Okay, so this was a brief summary about why ThoughtWorks thinks of serverless architecture as hold, which means from their side, proceed with caution.